Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here with yet another monthly ranking. So for this year I'll be ranking my palettes in the sense of usage. So each month I come back and show you guys what palette I used and also how many times I used them, from the lowest used palette to the highest used palette. And I'm doing this partly because I'm doing my Big Fat Eyeshadow project, where I obviously use all my palettes, and I also earn eyeshadow bank points. So I track my eyeshadow usage anyway, per shade. So every single shade I use, I track. So I thought it would be nice to share with you what palettes I used and how many times I used them. For my uses, I count one eyeshadow used as one use. So for example, if I use 5 eyeshadows in one look, that's 5 uses. But obviously if I use the same eyeshadow twice in the same look, that's 1 use, if that makes sense. So I'm going to jump into the first palette, but before I do so, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you in the family. Let's jump into the video. So we are going to start off with the lowest ranking palette, and that one is my Red Dragon palette from Odensai in collaboration with Judy. So this palette I actually only used once. I only used one of the shades, and that is the shade Jade. I've recently rolled this one into my Pandas eyeshadows, and I've used that one once. So that is the first palette. Very boring, but yeah, I used this one once. Then the second least used palette is my Going Coconuts palette. Again, this is one that I use in my Pandas eyeshadows. I was working on the shade Colada, which I actually rolled out last month, but I had 4 more uses to go in the month of May, so I used it the remaining 4 times. This palette considered 4 uses. I didn't use any of the other shades in this palette. Same with the Red Dragon palette, I only focused on the shade that I was panning. So that is in spot number 7, I believe. Yeah, that was spot 7. And coming into spot 6, we have my Rose Quartz palette. So this palette I used a little bit more, still in the single digits. So I used it 6 times. And I believe the shade that I reached for, I know that I hit pan on this one in my Pandas eyeshadows. Maybe all 6 uses were from there. I think it might be. I've already reached for this palette early in the year quite a lot, but 6 uses in May to hit pan on Joy. So that is in 6th space. So let's move on to palette number 5. And this is when we're getting into the higher numbers a little bit, because the rest of the palettes are palettes that I've worked on in my Big Fat Eyeshadow project as a pro level up palette or as my Panda palette. So these always gets a bit more use. So first out of those, we have my Sweet Talk palette from Colourpop. This is actually the last palette that I reached for in my Big Fat Eyeshadow project. And this time around, actually, I only managed to do 2 out of the 3 looks in the month of May. I did do the 3rd look, but I did it early in June. So those uses are going to count into the numbers for this month. But I think that's why this one ranks the lowest out of the 4 palettes that I had, or the 3 palettes I had in that project. And this one comes in at 13 uses, so yeah, pretty good. Obviously I did use it more than that, but in the month of May I only reached it 13 times. And yeah, it's a really nice palette. If you want to hear what I thought about it, you can check out my Big Fat Eyeshadow project, which should have been my last video going up. Moving on, we have another Big Fat Eyeshadow project palette, and that is the New Light Obsessions from Huda Beauty, and this one comes in at number 4. So this palette only has 9 shades, as you can see. It looks like this. And I used this one 15 times, which is pretty good, especially because it's a 9-pan palette, because that means that I reached for some of the shades quite a lot. But yeah, 15 uses on this palette, and yeah, I'm happy with that. Again, you can check out my photos on this one in my previous video. Okay, so we're getting into the quite high numbers, which I'm super happy with. We're getting into the 20s now, and this is palette number 3. So for palette number 3, we have my Huda Beauty Mercury Retrograde palette, which is another one of my Big Fat Eyeshadow project palettes. Yeah, this one was the last one of those 3 that I handpicked. And this one looks like this. I think all of you guys are aware what it looks like. But this palette has 23 uses, if I didn't mention that already, which I'm really happy with. It is a 18-pan palette, I believe. So obviously, I didn't reach for everything too many times, but I know for a fact that I reached for every single shade at least once. I also had this shade over here in my Expandos pan, so I used that for that one 5 times. And then I know that I reached for Supermoon a couple times, and maybe that's it, I can't remember, but 23 uses in this palette, so it got some really good use, and it's a good spring tone palette, so I was happy to reach for it in the month of May. So we are already into my second place palette, and you can put in your bets now what is going to be in second and first place, but yeah, I'm going to show you, of course. So coming in second place, we have my current product level up palette, which is the Merry Christmas palette from Odin's Eye. Sorry, I'm checking how many uses I have. So this one I have used quite a lot. So this palette comes in at 37 uses currently in the month of May, which is pretty good. And it is a 16-pound palette. I'm not going to show you what it looks like because I'm going to update my product level up in a couple of days. So yeah, I'm not gonna show you the inside because you're gonna see it there. But I do have 37 uses in it in the month of May, and with a 16-pound palette, that can kind of give you an inclination if I have hit my uses or not for this palette in product level up. But yeah, I'm happy with the progress for this one so far. It's definitely going to get more uses in June, but if you want a proper update for this one, you have to wait a couple more days until I upload that update, and then you will see what this actually looks like and how many times I used each shade. But yeah, this one comes in place number 2. And as always, we have a clear winner, and that is my current Panda palette. If you haven't checked out my update, make sure to check that out before I show you the insides. But I'm going to show it now, and this is what the palette looks like now. This one is again the clear winner. This one is like almost 100 uses. Well, it's about 90 uses more than my second place palette, because this one comes in at 128 uses, which I'm really happy with. I'm super happy with so many uses on this palette. It is important to note though that 41 out of those 128 uses was because I used one of these shades in a Franken, which I finished in the month of May. So I counted those 41 uses into that month because I didn't want to count them until I finished it. So yeah, I mean, it's not nearly as high as 128, but it's still, what is that, like in the 90s almost? Yeah, around the 90s, which is again really, really good for a palette. So this here is my most used palette, which again, I keep saying every single one of my ranking videos, but it's most likely going to be the case for majority of the year because I am obviously trying to finish this palette. And I now have 2 finished shades in this palette, which is really, really exciting. I finished the shade Tempera in the last month. But yeah, this one, really happy with how it's looking, and I'm obviously going to keep working this one, and it's probably going to keep ranking the highest moving forward. So those were all of the palettes that I reached for in the past month. We reached for 8 palettes, and yeah, pretty happy with that. Not my best month, but I'm happy with what I reached for, and I'm happy to get some like high usage in some of the palettes, especially the ones that are in my Big Fat Eyeshadow project, and that is also one of the reasons that I'm doing that project. Just to kind of use the palettes as a whole and get more use out of them, rather than having all my palettes like I did with the early on palettes, you know, when I only reached for like 1 shade because I'm panning it. Because that has been my tendencies for the last couple of years, is to only really reach for like 1 or 2 shades whenever I reach for a palette, simply because I'm panning those. But that is going to be it for today, you guys. It's a short and sweet video as always. I feel like these videos always end up being quite short, but I hope you enjoyed it nevertheless, and I hope you're having an amazing day wherever you are, and I will catch you in my next one. Bye guys!